that he was a 16-year-old who rose to fame overnight and never had any guidance on finances, never knew how much money was in his bank account. Business managers handle that.
Remember, his mother was found guilty of fraud and grand theft as well. She got sentenced to 5 years in federal prison last month. Prosecutors said Kingston and his mother used his celebrity name to trick luxury businesses into delivering things to them before getting payment.
In 2007, Sean Kingston became one of the biggest names in music almost overnight. Within months, he was living in mansions, driving luxury cars, and collaborating with the likes of Justin Bieber. But fast forward to 2024, and the same man was being let out of a courtroom in handcuffs, sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison for a $1 million fraud scheme. So how did one of the most promising young stars of the 2000s go from topping charts to serving time in prison? Let's start from the beginning, because Sean Kingston's rise was nothing short of incredible. We're talking about 2007 here. YouTube was still pretty new, social media wasn't what it is today, and getting a hit song meant you were basically guaranteed to be a household name. Sean Kingston, real name Kashawn Anderson, wasn't some industry plant or nepo baby. This was a genuine, overnight success story that seemed too good to be true. Beautiful Girls didn't just climb the charts, it shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there. Think about how hard that is, especially for a debut single. You had established artists with massive budgets and industry connections, and here comes this 17-year-old kid with a reggae pop fusion that nobody had really heard before. The song was playing at every school dance, every mall, every radio station. You literally couldn't escape it. But here's what made Sean different from other one-hit wonders. He kept the momentum going. Take You There was another massive hit. Then came Fire Burning, which had everyone singing along. And let's not forget Eeny Meeny with a young Justin Bieber, back when Bieber was still that innocent kid with a bowl cut. By the time Sean turned 18, his life looked like something out of a movie. We're talking about multiple mansions, a garage full of luxury cars, designer clothes, and hanging out with the biggest names in Hollywood. The money was flowing like crazy, and from the outside, it looked like he had figured out the secret to life. But here's where the story starts getting complicated, and this is important because it sets up everything that comes later. People who worked with Sean back then started noticing some red flags. He was incredibly generous, like maybe too generous. We're talking about buying expensive gifts for friends he barely knew, lending money to people without any paperwork, and making investments that didn't make any sense. Now, being generous isn't a bad thing, but when you're 18 years old with millions of dollars and no real financial education, it can become a problem really quickly. Sean was living like the money would never stop coming, which honestly, most teenagers would probably do in his position. Throughout all of this, his mom, Janice Turner, was right there beside him. She had her own complicated past. She'd even spent time in prison before Sean's success. But now, it seemed like they had both made it out of tough circumstances and were living the American dream. Mother and son, supporting each other, conquering the music world together. Then came May 2011 and everything changed in the span of a few seconds. Sean was in Miami enjoying what should have been a perfect day. He was out in the water with a friend, riding jet skis, probably feeling on top of the world. And then, disaster struck. Sean lost control of his jet ski and crashed directly into a bridge. This wasn't just a minor accident or a close call. This was a life-threatening situation that nearly killed him. When the paramedics got to him, he was in critical condition with injuries that would have been fatal for many people. The medical report was terrifying. He had a torn aorta, which is basically your body's main artery. If that's damaged, you can bleed out in minutes. His jaw was completely broken, and he had water in his lungs from nearly drowning. The doctors weren't even sure if he was going to survive the first night. For weeks, Sean was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. Multiple surgeries, constant monitoring, family members not knowing if he'd ever wake up. When he finally started recovering, the real work began. He had to relearn basic things like walking properly and talking clearly. Months of physical therapy just to get back to functioning normally. But the entertainment industry doesn't wait for anyone. While Sean was in the hospital fighting to survive, the music world kept spinning. New artists were dropping hits, new sounds were taking over the charts, and Sean's momentum completely disappeared. This is where his legal team would later argue that the accident affected his mental state and decision-making abilities. They claimed he became more impulsive and started relying heavily on other people, especially his mom, to handle his business affairs because he wasn't thinking clearly anymore. After Sean recovered from the accident, he tried really hard to get back to where he was. He released new singles, he did collaborations with other artists, he experimented with different sounds. Basically, everything you'd expect from someone trying to recapture their earlier success. The problem was that none of it worked. The music industry had moved on, and Sean's new stuff just wasn't hitting the same way. His streaming numbers were decent, but nowhere near what they used to be. Concert bookings were smaller. Endorsement deals were harder to come by. The reality was setting in that his peak earning years might be behind him. But here's where Sean made a critical mistake that a lot of celebrities make. He refused to adjust his lifestyle to match his new income level. The cars got more expensive, not less. The jewelry collection kept growing. He was still maintaining multiple properties and living like he was making chart-topping money. How do you maintain a millionaire lifestyle when you're not making millionaire money? Well, Sean figured out a system, and this is where things started getting really sketchy. According to court documents that came out later, Sean developed a pattern of getting luxury goods without paying for them up front. He would reach out to high-end dealers, people who sold custom jewelry, luxury cars, expensive furniture, designer clothes, and use his celebrity status to make deals. The pitch was usually something like this: "Give me the product now and I'll pay you later. Plus, I'll post about your business on my social media, which will bring you tons of new customers." For a lot of small luxury businesses, this sounded like a dream deal. They'd get paid eventually, and they'd get celebrity endorsement that could be worth way more than the original price. A Miami jeweler who got caught up in this later told reporters, "The social media post happened like he promised, but the payments never came." And it wasn't just one or two items we're talking about. Court records showed that there were lawsuits in multiple states for unpaid bills on custom watches worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, luxury furniture sets, high-end electronics, and more. By 2018, Sean was dealing with legal problems in several different states, all related to unpaid debts to luxury goods dealers. Any normal person would have realized this was unsustainable and either found a way to pay their bills or seriously downgraded their lifestyle. Okay, well, this is where the story goes from celebrity having money problems to federal criminal investigation. Because what Sean and his mom allegedly did next wasn't just irresponsible, it was straight up illegal. From 2018 to 2024, while Sean's social media still showed him living the luxury life, prosecutors say he and his mom Janice were running an elaborate fraud scheme. The genius part of the scheme was that Sean would often invite these sellers to his homes in South Florida. Once they were there, Sean wouldn't just talk about buying their products. He'd sell them on the idea that working with him would be amazing for their business. He'd promise to post their products on his social media accounts, introduce them to other celebrities, maybe even mention their company in interviews. For small business owners, this kind of celebrity endorsement could be worth way more than whatever they were charging for their products. But here's where the scam part comes in. When it came time to actually pay for these items, Sean or his mom would send what looked like proof of payment, usually something that appeared to be a wire transfer receipt showing that the money had been sent. The documents looked official, had all the right numbers and bank information, and seemed completely legitimate. The only problem? The money never actually moved. These were fake receipts created to look like real financial transactions, but with no actual money behind them. The list of stuff they allegedly got this way is absolutely insane. We are talking about a 232-inch LED, micro-LED TV that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. A bulletproof Cadillac Escalade. Custom designer furniture worth more than most people's houses. Multiple luxury watches that each cost more than a car. In total, prosecutors say the goods they obtained through this scheme were worth over $1 million. Now, while some of the sellers eventually did get paid, usually only after they hired lawyers or when the police got involved, but for many others, the money never came at all. And according to prosecutors, this wasn't something that happened a few times by accident. This was a repeated pattern that went on for years. By early 2024, federal investigators had been building a case against Sean Kingston and his mom for months. They had collected evidence, interviewed victims, traced financial records, basically everything you need for a major fraud prosecution. And when they were ready to move, they did it in a way that nobody saw coming. In May 2024, Sean was in California, scheduled to perform at a U.S. Army training base in the Mojave Desert. This was probably just another gig for him: perform for the troops, collect his fee, and move on to the next show. He had no idea that federal agents were tracking his every move. And that's when SWAT teams moved in and arrested him on the spot. Can you imagine being Sean in that moment? One minute you're getting ready to perform, the next minute you're surrounded by armed federal agents in tactical gear. This wasn't some local police showing up with a warrant. This was a full federal operation. But the raid in California was just part one. At the exact same time, hundreds of miles away in Florida, another team of agents was executing a search warrant on Sean's massive home in Southwest Ranches. And this wasn't just any house. We were talking about a huge luxury property filled with expensive cars, custom decor, high-end furniture, and all the trappings of celebrity wealth. Inside the house, agents found Sean's mother, Janice Turner, and immediately took her into custody. The indictment that was unsealed that day laid out a detailed case of organized fraud and grand theft, alleging that both Sean and his mom had been running their scam operation for years. For Sean, this raid marked the moment when his private legal troubles became very public news. Suddenly, every entertainment blog and news website was running stories about his arrest. His social media comments were flooded with people asking what was going on. The carefully maintained image of success and wealth was completely shattered in a single day. When Sean Kingston's trial finally began, it was like watching a masterclass in how not to run a celebrity lifestyle. The prosecutors came prepared with evidence that painted a detailed picture of exactly how the alleged fraud scheme worked, and it was way more organized than most people expected. The most damaging piece of evidence was probably a text message between Sean and his mom. In the message, Sean allegedly told his mother, "I told you to make a fake receipt." That single text message became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case because it showed direct involvement in creating fraudulent payment documents. But the text messages were just the beginning. The prosecution brought in victim after victim to tell their stories, and the pattern was always the same. They'd meet Sean Kingston, be impressed by his celebrity status and apparent wealth, believe his promises about payment and promotion, and then never receive the money they were owed. One victim testified about delivering expensive jewelry to Sean's home, getting what appeared to be legitimate payment confirmation, and then having the payment bounce. Another talked about providing a luxury car and waiting months for payment that never came. Each story added another layer to the prosecution's argument that this was a systematic scheme, not just poor money management. The prosecutors made a key argument that really seemed to resonate with the jury. They said Sean's fame wasn't just part of his life, it was part of the crime. They argued that he deliberately used his celebrity status to gain people's trust and make them believe he was wealthy enough to easily afford their products. Sean's defense team, led by attorney Zelka Bojanic, tried to paint a completely different picture. They argued that Sean wasn't a calculated criminal mastermind, but rather a soft guy who still had the mental capacity of a teenager due to his traumatic jet ski accident years earlier. The defense strategy was to show that Sean relied too heavily on his mother for business decisions and didn't fully understand what was happening with the fake receipts and fraudulent payments. They painted him as someone who was taken advantage of, rather than someone who was actively orchestrating a fraud scheme. The day Sean Kingston learned his fate was one of those moments where you could feel the tension in the room. He stood in front of the federal judge, probably knowing that his life was about to change dramatically, and gave a brief statement saying, "I've learned from my actions." His lawyer made one final push for mercy, talking about his medical issues from the jet ski accident, his youth when the crimes allegedly occurred, and arguing that he didn't have true criminal intent. They were basically asking the judge to see Sean as someone who made bad decisions, rather than someone who set out to defraud people. But the prosecutors weren't having any of it. They called Sean a thief through and through and argued for the maximum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. They pointed out that the fraud scheme wasn't a one-time mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern that continued for years and hurt multiple victims. The prosecutors also argued that Sean showed no real remorse for his actions and continued to live lavishly even while the investigation was ongoing. From their perspective, this wasn't someone who deserved sympathy. This was someone who deliberately chose to commit crimes to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next video.